Please, just dance with me. My ex is here," she whispered, grabbing the lapel of a stranger's tuxedo to anchor herself. She didn't look at his face. She just needed a shield. What she didn't know was that the man she had just pulled onto the dance floor didn't do favors. He didn't do charity. And he certainly wasn't a safe harbor. He was the reason half the men in the room were sweating through their suits. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel felt less like a celebration and more like a beautifully decorated hostage situation. Harper hated corporate galas. She hated the forced laughter that sounded like breaking glass. She hated the smell of expensive, suffocating perfumes masking the scent of desperation. And most of all, she hated that her architecture firm had practically mandated her attendance to secure a bid for a new city development project. She stood near a towering ice sculpture that was slowly weeping onto a silver tray, nursing a glass of champagne that had gone warm 20 minutes ago. Then the trapdoor in her stomach gave way. The heavy mahogany doors at the entrance swung open. Trent walked in. He didn't just walk. He glided, wearing that same insufferable, easy smirk that had once convinced Harper to co-sign a lease and empty her savings account for his start-up. Beside him, clinging to his arm like a decorative vine, was Mia, the girl he had sworn was just a graphic designer for his app. The graphic designer he had been sleeping with in their bed while Harper was working 70-hour weeks to keep them afloat. Harper's breath hitched. Her lungs suddenly forgot how to expand. She watched Trent scan the room. He was looking for her. She knew that look. It was the predatory sweep of a man who wanted to make sure his presence was still felt, still destructive. If he cornered her here, in front of the firm's partners, she would unravel. He knew exactly which buttons to press to make her seem erratic, emotional, and unstable. It was his favorite party trick. "Move!" Her brain fired the command, but her feet were poured concrete. Trent's gaze ticked toward the ice sculpture. He stopped. His smirk widened. He tapped Mia's hand and pointed his chin in Harper's direction. Panic, sharp and metallic, flooded Harper's mouth. She needed an exit. She scanned the perimeter, but the doors were blocked by a cluster of investors. The restrooms were on the other side of the dance floor. She stepped backward, her heel catching on the thick carpet. She stumbled, her shoulder colliding with something solid. Not a wall. A person. Careful. The voice was low. It didn't belong to the bright, noisy atmosphere of the gala. It sounded like gravel rolling under a heavy tire. Harper spun around, her champagne sloshing over the rim of her glass and spotting the sleeve of a charcoal-black tuxedo jacket. I'm so sorry," she stammered, looking up. He was tall. That was the first thing she registered. Broad-shouldered and carved out of something immovable. He stood in the darkest corner of the room, far from the chandeliers, holding a glass of amber liquid. He wasn't mingling. He wasn't smiling. He was just watching the room with a gaze so cold it made the ice sculpture seem warm. His eyes dropped to the wet spot on his sleeve, then slowly lifted to her face. He didn't look annoyed. He looked entirely indifferent. Harper looked past him. Trent was weaving through the crowd, heading straight for her. 5 tables away. 4. Survival instinct is a funny thing. It bypasses logic. It ignores social convention. Harper slammed her glass down on a passing waiter's tray, stepped directly into the tall stranger's personal space, and grabbed the lapel of his jacket. The fabric felt absurdly expensive, heavy and smooth. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just dance with me, my ex is here." The man stared down at her. He didn't pull away. He didn't speak. For a second, time seemed to stall. The ambient noise of the ballroom muted. Harper realized what she was doing. She was clutching a complete stranger, a man who looked like he could break a jaw with the back of his hand, begging him to play her fake boyfriend. "I'm sorry, that's insane!" She backpedaled, her face burning. She let go of his jacket, her fingers tingling. I'll go. She turned to flee, but a heavy hand wrapped around her wrist. The grip wasn't painful, but it was absolute. It said, "You aren't going anywhere." She looked back. The stranger set his glass on a nearby cocktail table with a quiet clink. "Which one is he?" the man asked. His voice was a calm, steady rhythm underneath the loud, pulsing jazz of the live band. The one in the navy suit, smiling like he owns the place. Harper breathed out, her chest tight. The man looked over her head. His eyes narrowed fractionally. A micro-expression. Something dark and sharply amused flickered across his face. "I see him," he murmured. Before Harper could process his tone, his hand slid from her wrist to her lower back. The warmth of his palm bled through the thin silk of her dress. He guided her forward, moving with a fluid, silent grace that didn't match his size. They stepped onto the polished wood of the dance floor. "Follow my lead," he said, and then he pulled her flush against his chest. The band was playing a slow, dragging blues number. A horn section groaned out a heavy melody. Harper was stiff as a board. She had her hands flat against the stranger's chest, trying to maintain a respectable distance, but he wasn't having it. His hand on her back applied a steady, unyielding pressure until her thighs brushed against his. "You're shaking," he noted quietly. "I'm not a good dancer," she lied. "You're terrified." He corrected her. It wasn't a question. Harper looked up at him. Up close, his face was striking, but not conventionally handsome. It was too sharp. The jawline was rigid, covered in a faint shadow of stubble. He had a small, faded scar cutting through his left eyebrow. His eyes were a dark, endless brown, completely devoid of the performative warmth everyone else in this room wore. "He's a lot," Harper whispered, keeping her voice down so the couples turning around them wouldn't hear. "Trent. He has this way of taking up all the air in a room, and if he corners me, he'll make a scene. I can't afford a scene tonight. My bosses are here. So you grabbed the first man you saw. You were standing in the shadows. You looked like you weren't busy." A low rumble started in his chest. It took Harper a second to realize it was a laugh. It was a dry, rusty sound, like he didn't use it often. "I suppose I'm not busy," he said. They turned to the music. Harper finally let herself lean into the movement. The man was a surprisingly good dancer. He didn't count steps. He just moved, and the space around them seemed to automatically clear. Actually, Harper noticed, people were giving them a very wide berth. A couple bumped into them from behind. The man in the other couple, a wealthy-looking executive in his 50s, turned around with a scowl, ready to snap an apology or a reprimand. Harper watched the executive's eyes land on her partner's face. The scowl vanished instantly. The color drained from the executive's cheeks, leaving him looking like a sick ghost. "My apologies," the older man stammered, grabbing his wife's arm and practically dragging her off the dance floor. Harper frowned. "Do you know him?" "Never met him," the stranger said smoothly. He spun her lightly, pulling her back in before she could lose her balance. "Stop looking at the crowd. Look at me." "I'm trying to see where Trent is. He's standing at the edge of the floor, near the brass section. He's holding a martini and he looks like he swallowed a lemon." The stranger didn't even turn his head to check. He just knew. Harper felt a spike of vindictive satisfaction. "Good. He hurt you." It was a statement of fact, delivered with the casual detachment of someone reading a weather report. "He destroyed my credit score, stole my dog, and slept with his graphic designer in the apartment I paid for," Harper said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Why was she telling this to a stranger? Maybe because he felt completely disconnected from her reality. He was a temporary wall. "The dog is a tragedy," the man said. "The rest is just money and bad taste." Harper let out a startling, genuine laugh. The tension in her shoulders dropped an inch. "You're very cynical." "I'm observant." He shifted his grip, moving his hand from her back to the nape of her neck. His fingers tangled slightly in the loose hair escaping her updo. A shiver raced down Harper's spine. The touch was intimate, possessive, and entirely unexpected. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her heart kicking into a higher gear. "Giving him a show." The man murmured, leaning down so his mouth hovered just inches from her ear. His breath was warm, smelling faintly of expensive whiskey and mint. "He's watching. If we're going to sell this, we sell it. Unless you want him to think you pulled a stranger into a corner out of desperation." Harper swallowed hard. He was right. Trent fed on weakness. She slid her hands from his chest up to his shoulders. She felt the heavy musculature beneath the wool suit. He felt carved out of granite. She rested her cheek against his lapel, closing her eyes. "Thank you," she breathed. "I don't even know your name." "Roman. I'm Harper." "I know," he said softly. Harper pulled her head back, her brow furrowing. "How do you know my name?" Before Roman could answer, the horn section hit a final, mournful note. The song ended. The smattering of applause broke the spell, washing over the room and dragging Harper back to reality. She took a step back, breaking the physical contact. The sudden absence of his body heat left her feeling exposed. "Well," Harper said, smoothing down the front of her dress, suddenly feeling incredibly foolish. "Thank you, Roman. You really saved me a headache. I should probably get back to my colleagues." She turned to leave the floor, and found her path blocked by a navy suit. "Trent." "Harper!" Trent stood there, a condescending smile plastered across his face. He held his martini glass by the stem, casually swaying on his heels. Mia was hovering a few steps behind him, looking nervously between Trent and the crowd. Harper felt the familiar cold wash of anxiety. Her throat tightened. "Trent, excuse me, I'm heading back to my table." Trent shifted, blocking her again. "Come on, Harp. No need to be rude. I saw you stumble out there. Still have 2 left feet, I see." He chuckled, looking her up and down. His eyes caught on the slightly frayed hem of her dress, a dress she'd bought 3 years ago because she couldn't afford a new one after paying off his debts. Though I guess the dress is doing most of the heavy lifting tonight. Harper's hands curled into fists. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw his drink in his face. Instead, she just felt tired, exhausted by his endless need to belittle her. "Move, Trent," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Or what?" Trent leaned in, lowering his voice to that mocking, intimate tone he used when he wanted to make her feel small. "You're gonna cry? Don't make a scene, Harp. Not in front of your bosses. You're already on thin ice, aren't you?" A heavy silence dropped directly behind Harper. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that precedes a car crash. The air pressure in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop. Harper didn't even realize Roman had moved until he was standing shoulder to shoulder with her. He didn't look at Trent. He was casually adjusting the French cuff of his shirt, his dark eyes fixed on a diamond button. "Is there a problem here?" Roman asked. The voice was quiet, flat. Trent blinked, looking at Roman. He puffed out his chest, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He looked at Roman's plain black tuxedo and the lack of a recognizable corporate badge. "No problem," Trent said, puffing a short, arrogant laugh. "Just catching up with my ex. We go way back. I'm just telling her she should stick to the open bar instead of the dance floor. Who are you? One of her new architect buddies." Roman finally looked up from his cuff. He didn't glare. He didn't puff out his chest. He simply looked at Trent the way a person looks at a cockroach on the pavement before stepping on it. "Trent, is it?" Roman asked. "Yeah, and you are?" "Bored," Roman said softly. Trent's smirk faltered. He took a half-step forward, trying to reclaim his alpha male posturing. "Listen, pal, this is a private conversation, so why don't you go fetch another drink and let the adults talk?" Mia, standing behind Trent, suddenly gasped. It was a sharp, terrified sound. Harper looked at her. Mia was staring at Roman, her face entirely drained of color. She tugged frantically on the back of Trent's jacket. Trent, stop, we need to go." "Hold on, Mia," Trent snapped, shaking her off. He glared at Roman. I told you to take a walk, buddy. Roman slowly placed his hands in his trouser pockets. He tilted his head. You have about 3 seconds to turn around and walk out those mahogany doors, Roman said. His voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the ambient noise of the ballroom like a scalpel. If you are still in this building in 4 seconds, you won't be walking out at all. Trent laughed, but it was a brittle, nervous sound. Are you threatening me? Do you know who I am? You run a failing tech startup backed by borrowed money you can't repay. Roman interrupted smoothly, his voice dropping into a deadly, hypnotic cadence. You drive a leased Porsche. You have $42,000 in credit card debt. And you have a severely inflated sense of your own permanence. Trent froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Harper stared at Roman, her heart hammering against her ribs. How did he know that? Roman took one single deliberate step forward. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't shout. But the sheer oppressive gravity of his presence hit Trent like a physical blow. 2 seconds, Roman whispered. At that moment, a man in a sharp grey suit stepped out of the crowd. He was built like a heavyweight boxer, an earpiece curled around his right ear. He stopped 2 feet behind Roman, ignoring Trent entirely. Mr. Costa, the man in the grey suit said, his tone incredibly respectful. The car is out front. The meeting downtown is set for 10. Trent stopped breathing. Harper saw it happen. She saw the exact second Trent processed the name. Costa. Roman Costa. Everyone in the city knew the name Costa. It wasn't associated with architecture or tech startups or charity galas. It was associated with the docks, with the shipping lines, with union strikes that ended violently, and politicians who suddenly changed their votes, and men who disappeared, leaving only rumors behind. Trent took a step back, his foot catching on Mia's shoe. He practically stumbled. The arrogance didn't just drain from his face, it evaporated, replaced by raw, naked terror. Trent swallowed, his eyes darting to the massive bodyguard, then back to Roman. I'm sorry, I was just leaving. Good, Roman said. He didn't look at Trent anymore. He turned his attention back to Harper. Trent grabbed Mia's arm and practically ran toward the exit, pushing past investors and waiters in a desperate bid to reach the doors. Harper stood rooted to the spot. Her hands were cold. The ballroom was spinning slightly. She looked at Roman, the man she had just grabbed, the man she had ordered to dance with her. Roman Costa, she whispered, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Roman looked down at her. The coldness in his eyes softened just a fraction. It wasn't warmth, but it was something like mercy. You should have let me break his jaw, Roman said casually, pulling his hands from his pockets. It would have been less paperwork. Harper couldn't breathe. I'm late for a meeting, Roman corrected, stepping past her. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. Keep your chin up, Harper, and next time you need a fake boyfriend. He smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. Pick someone a little less dangerous. The Monday morning after the gala, the fluorescent lights in the architectural firm felt like interrogation lamps. Harper sat at her drafting table, a lukewarm cup of bitter coffee resting near her elbow. She hadn't slept properly in 3 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the cold, deadpan expression on Roman Costa's face right before he verbally dismantled Trent. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. You don't just use a syndicate boss as a human shield and walk away without a scratch. But nothing happened. Trent hadn't called. He hadn't texted. He hadn't left his usual passive-aggressive voicemails threatening to take her to small claims court for the furniture they used to share. His silence was profound, total, and utterly terrifying. At 10 a.m., her desk phone blinked. It was the senior partner, Miller. Harper, in my office. Now. She swallowed hard. This was it. Someone had seen the altercation. Miller was a coward when it came to bad PR, and a public spat involving the city's most notorious organized crime figure was definitely bad PR. She grabbed her notebook, mentally drafting her resignation speech. Miller's office smelled of expensive leather and stale cigar smoke. He was pacing behind his desk when she walked in, his normally ruddy face pale. "Sit," he said, gesturing vaguely to the chair opposite him. Harper sat, keeping her spine rigid. "Mr. Miller, if this is about Friday night—" "Friday night?" Miller waved a hand, dismissing the thought before it even formed. "I don't care about the gala, Harper. I care about the West End Harbour project." Harper blinked. The Harbour project was the firm's White Whale, a massive multi-million-dollar revitalization of the old industrial docks. They had bid on it months ago and had been functionally ghosted by the developers. "Did we get a rejection?" she asked. "No." Miller stopped pacing and leaned heavily on his desk, staring at her as if she were a live grenade. "We got the contract, fully funded. Escrow cleared this morning, but there's a condition." "What condition?" "The holding company financing the development fired our lead architect on the project. They rejected my designs, they rejected Peterson's designs." Miller rubbed his temples. "They specifically requested you, by name." Harper's stomach dropped. The trap door from the gala was opening again, but this time the drop was much steeper. "Me? I'm just a junior associate. I don't have the clearance to lead a district project." "You do now," Miller said tightly. He didn't sound happy. He sounded trapped. "The holding company is called RC Holdings. I made 2 phone calls to find out who was backing them, and I was politely told to stop making phone calls. Do you understand what I'm saying, Harper?" She did. "RC Roman Costa." "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't care what you asked for," Miller snapped, a bead of sweat tracing his hairline. "You are going to take this project. You are going to give them whatever they want. You are going to draw the blueprints. You are going to smile. And you are going to keep this firm from getting gutted by whatever people you've somehow managed to involve yourself with." He practically shoved a thick manila folder across the desk. "Go. Your new office is on the top floor. You report directly to the client at the site at 4 o'clock today." Harper took the folder. Her hands were shaking again, just like they had on the dance floor. The rest of the day was a blur of forced congratulations from co-workers who suddenly treated her like she was radioactive. At 3:30 she packed her bag, left the building, and drove toward the West End. The docks were a graveyard of rusted cranes, crumbling brick warehouses, and shattered glass. The sky was an overcast, bruised purple, threatening rain. She parked a 10-year-old sedan next to a sleek, bulletproof-looking black SUV. She walked toward the largest warehouse, clutching her drafting tube like a weapon. The heavy metal door was propped open. Inside, the space was cavernous, smelling of salt, wet concrete, and old timber. In the center of the room, standing over a makeshift table made of plywood and sawhorses, was Roman. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo today. He wore a heavy wool overcoat over a dark sweater, his hands shoved in his pockets. He looked completely at home in the industrial ruin. The man in the grey suit from the gala, the bodyguard, stood near the back exit, silent as a shadow. Roman looked up as her heels clicked against the concrete. "You're late," he said. The gravel in his voice echoed in the empty space. "It's 4:01!" Harper shot back, adrenaline burning away her fear. She marched up to the plywood table and slammed her drafting tube down. "What is this? What are you doing?" Roman didn't flinch. He slowly pulled a hand from his pocket and tapped a large, rolled-up schematic on the table. "I'm revitalizing the West End, and you're designing it." "I don't want your charity," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and panic. "I didn't ask you to buy my boss, and I certainly didn't ask to be put in charge of a front for whatever it is you do." Roman looked at her. Really looked at her. His dark eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made the breath catch in her throat. "Charity?" He let out that dry, rusty laugh again. "Harper, I am a businessman. I don't give things away. I bought this land because it's a gold mine if it's zoned correctly. I need a legitimate architect who isn't going to ask stupid questions and who won't be bullied by city inspectors. And you think that's me? I know it's you! Roman stepped around the table, closing the distance between them. Harper held her ground, refusing to back up. He stopped barely a foot away. I had my people look into you over the weekend. You worked 70 hours a week for 3 years to put a parasite through his vanity projects while maintaining a flawless professional record. You are relentless, you are overworked, and you are entirely unappreciated. He leaned in slightly. And on Friday night, when you were backed into a corner, you didn't cry. You didn't run. You grabbed the most dangerous thing in the room and used it to survive. Harper stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. I need someone with that exact lack of self-preservation, Roman said quietly. Are you going to build my district, Harper? Or are you going to walk away and let men like Trent and Miller dictate the rest of your life? Harper didn't walk away. She told herself it was because the project was a once-in-a-lifetime career opportunity. She told herself it was because walking away from Roman Costa seemed vastly more dangerous than working for him. But deep down, in the quiet, honest hours of the night, she knew the truth. He was the first person in her life who looked at her and saw something sharper than a victim. For the next month, her life became a relentless cycle of concrete, coffee, and Costa. The West End Harbour project was massive. It wasn't a simple renovation, it was an overhaul. Roman wanted a luxury hotel, residential lofts carved out of the old brick warehouses, and a commercial boardwalk. And he was a demanding client. They met twice a week at the site, usually after hours when the construction crews had gone home. It was a Tuesday evening in late November. The temperature had plummeted, and the industrial space was freezing. Harper was huddled over the plywood table in the main warehouse, bundled in a thick scarf, arguing with a contractor over the phone about load-bearing steel beams. She hung up, rubbing her temples to ward off a migraine. A heavy, warm coat was suddenly draped over her shoulders. She jumped, spinning around. Roman was standing right behind her. She hadn't even heard his car pull up. He smelled of cold air, expensive leather, and something uniquely his own, a dark, woody scent that she was becoming far too accustomed to. You're shivering, he said, stepping back to give her space, though his gaze remained fixed on her. The heating hasn't been installed yet. Harper muttered, pulling the coat tighter around herself. It swallowed her entirely, holding on to his body heat. And the steel suppliers are trying to push cheap materials. They think because I'm young, they can skim off the top. Roman's expression darkened instantly. It was a subtle shift, a tightening of the jaw, a slight narrowing of the eyes. But Harper had learned to read him. It was the look that usually preceded someone losing their job, or worse. Give me the supplier's name, Roman said flatly. No. Roman paused, tilting his head. No? I handle my own contractors, Roman. You hired me to manage the architecture and the site integrity. If you send one of your giant men in grey suits to threaten them, they'll comply out of fear, but they'll cut corners somewhere else to spite me. She grabbed a red pen and began aggressively marking a structural flaw on the blueprints. I'll reject their shipment tomorrow. Legally. By the book. It hits their wallet harder than a threat. Roman watched her for a long moment. The heavy silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind howling through the gaps in the warehouse siding. Then, he leaned over the table, bracing his hands on either side of the blueprints. His shoulder brushed against hers. You're ruthless, he murmured. I'm pragmatic, she corrected, refusing to look up from the paper, though her pulse was suddenly racing. I have to be. I'm dealing with a holding company on one side and corrupt suppliers on the other. You think I'm a mobster? I'm not an idiot, Roman. She finally looked at him. They were incredibly close. She could see the faint silver lines of the scar slicing through his eyebrow. I know what you are. I know where the money for this project comes from. I just choose not to ask the questions I don't want the answers to. Roman didn't smile, but a strange, heavy tension settled over his features. And does that scare you? Yes, she answered honestly, her voice dropping. But the strange thing is, I think you're the safest person I know right now. Roman stared at her, his dark eyes unreadable. Slowly, he reached up. His thumb brushed against her cheekbone, wiping away a smudge of charcoal dust she hadn't realized was there. His touch was rough, calloused, but incredibly gentle. Harper stopped breathing. The warehouse around them seemed to vanish. There was only the heat of his hand, the weight of his coat on her shoulders, and the gravity of his presence pulling her in. "You shouldn't trust me, Harper," he whispered, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I destroy everything I touch." "You're building this," she whispered back, nodding down at the blueprints. "Only so I have a clean place to stand." He dropped his hand, stepping back, cutting the invisible tether between them. The cold air rushed back in. "The city inspectors are coming Thursday. Be ready." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall. Harper watched him go, pulling his coat tighter around her, suddenly feeling the freezing temperature in her bones. By December, the skeletal frame of the new district was rising against the city skyline, and with it, Harper's reputation in the firm skyrocketed. Miller stopped barking orders and started asking for her opinions. Her salary was bumped. For the first time in her life, she had breathing room. She should have known the quiet wouldn't last. It happened on a Friday afternoon. Harper was in her office, finalizing the lighting schematics for the boardwalk, when her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Frowning, she answered. "Harper speaking? You think you're pretty smart, don't you, Harp?" The voice was slurred, bitter. "Trent." Harper's grip on the phone tightened. "Trent, do not call me again. I will file a restraining order." "Go ahead." He laughed, a nasty, hollow sound. "You think you're untouchable now because you're sleeping with a thug? I know what you're doing. I know who runs RC Holdings. I tipped off a reporter at the City Chronicle. An anonymous source told them Miller's golden girl is laundering money for the Costa family through the West End project." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her chest. "You're lying. You don't have proof." "I don't need proof, sweetheart. The press loves a scandal. And when the police start digging into those construction contracts, you're going to prison right alongside him. Have a nice weekend." The line went dead. Harper sat frozen. If the press ran a story linking her firm to Roman Costa's alleged illegal activities, the city would freeze the construction permits. The firm would fire her instantly to save themselves. The police would tear apart her life. Trent was stupid, but he was vindictive, and he had just dropped a match in a powder keg. She didn't call Miller. She didn't call a lawyer. She called Roman. He answered on the first ring. "Harper, we have a problem," she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the chaos in her head. 20 minutes later, Roman's black SUV pulled up to the curb outside her office building. Harper slid into the back seat. Roman was sitting there, reading a tablet, looking utterly relaxed. "Tell me," he said, not looking up. Harper told him everything. The phone call, the threat to the Chronicle, the potential audit. As she spoke, she watched his face. He didn't react. He didn't look angry. He just calmly turned off his tablet and set it on the leather seat. "Drive," Roman said to the driver in the front. "Roman, what are we going to do?" Harper asked, her anxiety finally spilling over. "If they run that story, the project is dead. My career is dead." Roman looked at her. "Your career is fine. The project is fine. But Trent is a mosquito," Roman interrupted smoothly. "And mosquitoes get swatted." "You can't kill him," Harper blurted out, her stomach turning. She hated Trent, but she didn't want blood on her hands. "Roman, please, no violence." Roman let out a slow, heavy breath. He reached across the seat and took her hand. His grip was firm, anchoring her. "I'm not going to kill him," Roman said quietly. Death is too quick for a man who tries to ruin your life twice. I'm going to educate him." They drove in silence for 30 minutes, heading out to the affluent suburbs. The SUV pulled up to a sleek, modern tech park building. Trent's startup headquarters. "Wait here," Roman commanded. He stepped out of the car. The bodyguard from the front seat followed him. Harper watched through the tinted window. She saw Roman walk into the glass front lobby. She couldn't hear what was happening, but she saw the security guard at the desk stand up aggressively, then immediately sit back down, his face pale, as Roman's bodyguard flashed something under his jacket. 10 minutes passed. Harper's heart beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Then Roman walked out. He wasn't rushing. He looked exactly as he had when he went in. Calm, immaculate, indifferent. He slid back into the car and tapped the glass partition. The driver pulled away. "What did you do?" Harper whispered, staring at him. Roman picked up his tablet again, turning the screen on. "His primary investor is a man named Varga," Roman said casually. "Varga owes my family a favor. I just called it in. Varga pulled his funding 10 minutes ago. Trent's company is bankrupt. The lease on his office has been terminated. And the reporter he called at the Chronicle? The editor-in-chief is my godfather. The story was killed before Trent even hung up the phone with you." Harper stared at him, stunned. "Just like that, you erased him." "I stripped him of his armor," Roman said, finally looking up from his screen. His eyes were dark, devoid of any mercy. "He has no money, no company, and no leverage. If he ever speaks your name again, he will find out exactly how uncharitable I can be. Do you understand?" Harper swallowed hard. She was looking at the monster hiding beneath the bespoke suits, the sheer terrifying power he wielded casually, with a single phone call. She should have been horrified. She should have run. Instead, a profound, undeniable sense of relief washed over her. She leaned back against the leather seat, closing her eyes. She let out a long, shaky breath. Roman moved closer. He didn't ask. He just wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled her against his side. Harper didn't resist. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady, calm beat of his heart. "You're safe, Harper," he murmured into her hair. "No one touches what is mine." She heard the possessiveness in his words. It wasn't a corporate agreement anymore. The line was crossed. And as the car drove through the rain-slicked streets of the city, Harper realized she didn't want to cross back. The SUV didn't take her back to her apartment. Harper didn't ask where they were going. The adrenaline that had spiked in her veins during the confrontation with Trent was crashing, leaving behind a heavy, hollow exhaustion. She kept her head resting against Roman's chest. The fabric of his coat was scratchy, smelling of winter air and faint cigar smoke. It was real. It was solid. It was the only thing in her life that currently wasn't shifting under her feet. They pulled into a subterranean garage beneath a high-rise downtown. The concrete walls were painted a stark, clinical white. Roman's bodyguard, who Harper had finally learned was named Thomas, stepped out and opened her door. Roman guided her to a private elevator. He didn't speak. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy with unspoken variables. He swiped a key card, and the doors slid shut, sealing them inside a mirrored box that shot upward with stomach-dropping speed. "My apartment is compromised?" Harper asked, her voice raspy. "For tonight," Roman said, his eyes fixed on the floor indicator. "My godfather killed the story at the Chronicle, but Trent is erratic. He just lost his company. Desperate men do stupid things, until my people make absolutely sure he's packed his bags and left the state. You stay with me." Harper didn't argue. A month ago, the idea of going to a crime boss's penthouse would have sent her running for the nearest police precinct. Tonight, she just wanted a stiff drink and a door that locked. The elevator chimed, opening directly into the penthouse. Harper stepped out and immediately felt the architect inside her wince. The space was massive, easily 4,000 square feet, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering grid of the city. But it was entirely devoid of life. The furniture was sleek, black, and aggressively modern. There were no photographs, no books, no art. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a very expensive waiting room. "You live here?" she asked, dropping her bag on a leather sofa that felt like it had never been sat on. "I sleep here," Roman corrected. He walked over to a wet bar tucked into the corner and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass. He offered it to her. "Drink." She took it, letting the bourbon burn a path down her throat. It chased away the lingering chill in her bones. She turned to look at him. He had taken off his overcoat and was loosening his tie, his movements slow and deliberate. "You didn't have to ruin him," Harper said quietly. Roman stopped. He looked at her, his expression hardening into that familiar, unreadable mask. "Yes, I did. You don't leave a threat standing, Harper. If you only wound an animal, it comes back to bite you. You remove its teeth, or you put it down. I'm not used to people fighting my battles. Get used to it." He walked closer, stopping just a few inches away. He looked down at her, his dark eyes tracing the lines of her face as if memorizing a blueprint. "I told you. I protect what is mine." Harper's breath hitched. She set her glass on the edge of a glass coffee table. The clink sounded incredibly loud in the cavernous room. "I'm not a piece of real estate, Roman. You didn't buy me." "I know. And I'm not a mobster's girlfriend. I'm a licensed architect. I have a career. I have a life outside of your holding company." She was listing facts, trying to anchor herself to the reality she had built, but the words sounded flimsy even to her own ears. "I know that too," he said softly. "Then what is this?" she demanded, gesturing between them. "Why did you put me in charge of the West End? Why are you destroying my ex-boyfriend's life? Why am I standing in your apartment?" Roman didn't answer immediately. He reached out, his knuckles brushing against the side of her neck. His skin was warm, rough, calloused from a life she couldn't begin to understand. "Because I am surrounded by people who smile at me, because they are terrified I will kill them," Roman said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly whisper. "I am surrounded by men who want my money, my territory, or my head. And then there is you." His thumb traced her jawline, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. "You looked me in the eye and told me my steel contractors were ripping me off. You yelled at me for being late. You aren't afraid of the monster, Harper. You just want the concrete poured correctly." He leaned in closer, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "You're the only real thing in my entire goddamn life. I am not letting you go." Harper knew she should step back. This was the point of no return. If she leaned in, she was accepting everything that came with him. The violence, the shadows, the danger. She was trading a predictable, lonely life for a volatile, terrifying one. She looked at the scar on his eyebrow. She thought of the heavy warmth of his coat in the freezing warehouse. She thought of the way the air in the room felt utterly still when he was near, as if he controlled the very atmosphere. She reached up and grabbed the lapels of his shirt, just like she had done at the gala. But this time, she wasn't asking for a shield. "Then don't let go," she whispered. She pulled him down. The kiss was like a collision. It wasn't gentle, it was possessive, demanding, and entirely desperate. Roman's arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet as he backed her into the edge of the leather sofa. The glass of bourbon on the table rattled. He tasted like expensive whiskey and raw adrenaline. Harper tangled her hands in his hair, feeling the hard lines of his shoulders beneath his shirt. For years, she had made herself small. She had accommodated Trent's ego, Miller's cowardice, the city's bureaucracy. She had filed her edges down to fit into the spaces they allowed her. Roman didn't want her to be small. He met her intensity with his own, treating her like an equal force of nature. When he finally pulled back to breathe, his forehead rested against hers. His chest was heaving. The perfectly controlled syndicate boss was gone, replaced by a man who looked entirely undone. "You are going to ruin my plans, Harper," he murmured, his hands gripping her waist tightly. "Good," she breathed back, pulling him down again. They were probably poorly drafted anyway. That night, in the quiet, sparse cold of the penthouse, they built a new foundation. It wasn't made of concrete or steel. It was made of raw honesty. Harper traced the old scars on his ribs, never asking where they came from. Roman held her as if she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. They had crossed the line, but neither of them looked back. January hit the city with the brutality of a hammer strike. The West End Harbour project was locked in ice. The steel beams were frozen, the concrete needed massive heaters to cure properly, and the wind coming off the water felt like shattered glass against the skin. Harper was practically living in her insulated boots and a heavy parka. The project was ahead of schedule, entirely because the contractors were too terrified of RC Holdings to delay a single shipment. Miller was ecstatic. The city council was pleased, but the quiet couldn't last. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Roman was in a meeting across the city, dealing with the shipping unions. Harper was in the makeshift site office, a heated trailer parked near the main gate, reviewing the electrical grid plans. The door to the trailer was kicked open. A blast of freezing air rushed in, sweeping the blueprints off her desk. Harper jumped to her feet, grabbing her heavy metal flashlight by instinct. 3 men walked in. They weren't construction workers. They didn't wear hard hats or high-visibility vests. They wore tailored wool coats and leather gloves. The man in the center was older, with silver hair slicked back, and a face that looked like it had been carved from a block of granite. He had a thick, jagged scar running down his cheek. Harper didn't recognize him, but she recognized the type. He breathed the same air as Roman. "You're in the wrong place," Harper said, keeping her voice steady, though her heart had immediately slammed into her ribs. "This is a restricted hard hat area. You need to leave." The older man looked around the cramped trailer, a look of profound disgust on his face. He stepped forward, his heavy boots tracking dirty snow onto the linoleum. "You the architect?" he asked. His voice was a thick, smoky rasp. "I'm the site manager," Harper corrected, "and I'm asking you to leave." The man smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "My name is Victor. Roman might have mentioned me. We're old family friends." Harper's grip on the flashlight tightened. Roman hadn't mentioned a Victor, but Roman didn't talk about his family business. "If you're a friend of Mr. Costa's, you can schedule an appointment at his downtown office. This is a construction site." Victor chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. He walked over to her desk and casually knocked her coffee mug onto the floor. It shattered, dark liquid splashing across her boots. "I don't make appointments, sweetheart," Victor said. He leaned over the desk, planting his gloved hands on the remaining blueprints. "I came to look at my investment. See, Roman is pouring millions of our dollars into this pile of rocks and frozen dirt. He says it's the future. Legitimate business. Clean money." Victor spat on the floor. "I think it's a distraction. I think he's getting soft, playing house with a pencil pusher while the East Side territory gets eaten alive by the Albanians." Harper stared at him. She didn't blink. She channeled every ounce of Roman's cold indifference she had witnessed over the last 2 months. "The structural integrity of this project is sound," Harper said coldly. "The ROI on the commercial leases alone will triple your initial investment within 5 years. If you don't understand basic urban development economics, that's your failure, not his." One of the men behind Victor stepped forward, his hand slipping inside his coat. Victor held up a hand, stopping him. He looked at Harper with a sudden, sharp interest. "You've got a mouth on you." "I have a schedule to keep," Harper said. "Get out of my trailer, or I'll have security remove you." "Security?" Victor laughed loudly. "Little girl, we are the security." He reached out, his hand snapping forward with terrifying speed, and grabbed her by the throat. Harper choked, dropping the flashlight. Victor pushed her back against the wall of the trailer, the thin metal groaning under her weight. He didn't squeeze hard enough to crush her windpipe, but the threat was absolute. He was proving a point. He was showing her exactly how fragile her world was. Roman thinks you make him look clean. Victor leaned in, his breath smelling of stale coffee and cigarettes. But you just make him vulnerable. Tell him Victor came by to inspect the site. Tell him I don't like the Foundation. And if he doesn't get back to his real job, I'm going to tear this whole place down, starting with you. Harper couldn't breathe. Black spots danced at the edge of her vision. She reached up, clawing at Victor's gloved hand, but it was like trying to pry off an iron clamp. Then the trailer door, which had swung shut, exploded open, not kicked, torn off its hinges. Thomas, the grey-suited bodyguard, came through the doorway like a freight train. He didn't say a word. He grabbed the man nearest to him, slammed his head into the metal doorframe with a sickening crunch, and tossed his limp body out into the snow. Victor dropped Harper, turning rapidly, his hand dropping to his waist, but Roman was already there. Harper collapsed against the wall, gasping for air, clutching her throat. Through watering eyes, she watched a side of Roman she had only ever suspected existed. Roman didn't yell. He didn't posture. He moved with a terrifying, predatory silence. He closed the distance between himself and Victor before the older man could draw his weapon. Roman grabbed Victor by the lapels of his coat and drove him backward, slamming him onto the drafting desk. The remaining thug drew a gun, but Thomas was already on him, a suppressed pistol pressed firmly against the man's temple. The trailer went completely still, save for Harper's ragged breathing. Roman stood over Victor, pressing his forearm against the older man's windpipe, exactly where Victor had held Harper. Roman's face was unrecognizable. The calm, detached businessman was gone. This was the syndicate boss. This was the apex predator. His eyes were entirely black, utterly devoid of humanity. "Roman!" Victor gasped, struggling. "Roman, listen! I told you!" Roman whispered. The sound was worse than a scream. It was the sound of a verdict being delivered. "You do not come to the West End. You do not touch my legitimate business. And you never, ever breathe the same air as her. You're weak." Victor choked out, spitting blood onto the blueprints. "The families, they see it. You're building a glass house." Roman leaned down until his mouth was inches from Victor's ear. "I'm building a graveyard, and you just picked out your plot." Roman pulled a heavy steel knife from his coat. The blade caught the harsh fluorescent light of the trailer. "Roman, stop!" Harper didn't shout it. She croaked it. Her voice was wrecked, her throat bruised and throbbing. But the sound cut through the violent tension in the room like a siren. Roman froze. The knife was an inch from Victor's face. He slowly turned his head to look at Harper. His chest was heaving. The violence was a physical aura radiating off him. He looked at her throat, seeing the red, angry marks beginning to form on her skin. Something fractured in his expression. The monster receded, just a fraction, leaving behind the man who had held her in the dark. "Get him out of here!" Roman said, his voice flat and dead. He stood up, shoving Victor off the desk. Thomas pulled his gun from the thug's head, grabbed Victor by the collar, and dragged him towards the door. "Walk," Thomas commanded. The three men stumbled out into the freezing wind, leaving behind shattered glass, ruined blueprints, and a suffocating silence. Roman stood in the center of the ruined trailer. He looked down at the knife in his hand, then tossed it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy, final thud. He didn't look at Harper. "Pack your things," Roman said quietly. "What?" Harper rasped, pushing herself off the wall. "I'm putting you on a plane. Thomas is taking you to an estate I own in Switzerland. You'll stay there until I tear Victor's faction apart, root and branch." Roman finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a dark, heavy grief. "I told you I destroy everything I touch. I almost got you killed today. I'm not leaving. This isn't a negotiation, Harper." Roman stepped forward, his voice rising, breaking his usual calm. "He put his hands on you. He used you to get to me. You don't understand the rules of this world. There is no line they won't cross. Then change the rules." Harper shot back, her voice gaining strength. She stepped toward him, ignoring the throbbing pain in her neck. "You hired me to build this district. You told me you wanted clean ground to stand on. You don't get that by shipping me off and turning this place into a war zone." Roman shook his head, running a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man watching his only lifeline burn. "Harper, you saw what I am. You saw what I was about to do to him. You can't stay with me." Harper walked right up to him. She didn't flinch. She reached out and took his hand, the same hand that had just held a knife to a man's throat. She intertwined her fingers with his. "I saw what you are," she said, looking him dead in the eye. "And I saw you stop, when I asked you to. Because I asked you to." Roman stared at her, the breath leaving his lungs in a shaky exhale. "I'm an architect, Roman," she whispered, stepping into his space. "I calculate load-bearing limits. I know what a structure can take before it collapses. I calculated the risk of you the night I walked into your apartment. I know exactly what you are, and I am not running." Roman closed his eyes, dropping his forehead against hers. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest so tightly it hurt, hiding his face in her neck. He breathed her in, his hands shaking against her spine. "I will burn the city down before I let them touch you again," he vowed against her skin. "I know," she said quietly, resting her hands on his shoulders. "But let's finish the buildings first." It took 18 months. 18 months of concrete trucks, union strikes, city council hearings, and quiet, violent shifts in the city's underworld that Harper intentionally ignored. Victor disappeared. The Albanian threat dissolved overnight. Roman never spoke of it, and Harper never asked. She focused on the steel. He focused on the shadows. Together they held the line. On a warm evening in late June, the West End harbour officially opened. The transformation was absolute. The rusted cranes and crumbling brick had been replaced by a sleek, modern waterfront. The luxury hotel stood like a beacon of glass and light against the dark water. The boardwalk was strung with warm, amber lights, packed with the city's elite, politicians, and business owners. It was a gala. But this time, Harper wasn't hiding near an ice sculpture. She stood at the center of the main ballroom in the newly finished hotel, holding a glass of champagne. She wore a stunning, backless emerald gown that commanded attention. She was no longer Miller's overworked junior associate. She was Harper, the lead architect of the city's most successful revitalization project in a decade. She was a partner at her firm. Miller stood a few feet away, practically sweating with pride as he shook hands with the mayor, carefully taking credit for Harper's genius. She let him. She didn't need the validation anymore. Because she had the power. She felt him before she saw him. The familiar drop in air pressure. The subtle parting of the crowd. Roman walked up behind her. He wore a tuxedo that mirrored the one from the night they met, immaculately tailored, cutting a sharp, dark figure against the bright celebration. Thomas stood 10 feet away, watching the perimeter, completely blending into the background. "You look bored," Roman murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Harper smiled, not turning around, leaning slightly back against his chest. "I'm just watching Miller try to explain the tensile strength of the boardwalk pylons to a senator. It's physically painful." Roman chuckled, the dry, rusty sound that she had grown to love. He slid his hand around her waist, resting his palm flat against her stomach. His touch was branding, protective, and public. Everyone in the room knew who he was. Everyone in the room knew she was his. and nobody dared say a word. The mayor asked me if I planned to develop the East Side next. Roman said casually. Harper turned around, looking up at him. His face was relaxed. The dark circles that used to haunt his eyes were gone. He still looked dangerous. He would always look dangerous, but the jagged edge of desperation had faded. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "I told him I have to consult my architect. She's incredibly demanding, refuses to cut corners." Roman reached out, tracing the line of her collarbone with his thumb. "The East Side is a mess," Harper said, her mind immediately shifting to zoning laws and soil samples. "The old factories are toxic. We'd have to tear everything down to the bedrock before we could even pour a foundation. Then we tear it down," Roman said softly, his dark eyes locking onto hers with that familiar, intense gravity. "We tear it down and build something that lasts." The jazz band at the front of the ballroom struck up a slow, dragging blues number. The horn section groaned out a heavy melody. It was the exact same style of music from the gala 3 years ago. Roman tilted his head, a rare, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Dance with me." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a desperate grab in the dark to escape an ex. It was a choice. Harper set her champagne glass on a passing waiter's tray. She stepped into his personal space, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I'm still not a good dancer," she teased. "Follow my lead," he said. He pulled her flush against his chest, moving them seamlessly onto the dance floor. The crowd gave them a wide berth, out of respect, out of fear, out of awe. Harper didn't care. She closed her eyes, resting her cheek against the heavy wool of his lapel. She listened to the steady, calm beat of his heart. She had asked a stranger to save her from a nightmare, not knowing she was pulling the devil onto the dance floor. But as they turned under the chandeliers of the empire they had built together, Harper realized the truth. He wasn't a safe harbor, but he was hers, and she was never letting go. Did Harper make the right choice by choosing the dangerous, protective embrace of a mafia boss over her predictable life, or did she just trade one cage for another? Let us know what you think of Harper and Roman's intense, high-stakes romance in the comments below. If you loved this deep, gritty story of building empires and undeniable chemistry, hit that like button, share it with your fellow romance drama fans, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more immersive, original storytelling. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter.